This changes everything, because for months, the public only saw one version of the story, a carefully crafted narrative built around silence, denial, and control. But now that silence has cracked, and the truth is pouring out, and it is not what anyone expected. Behind the glamorous red carpets and rehearsed interviews, a legal storm has been brewing. One that is now threatening to destroy the public image Blake Lively spent years building. And the reason is simple: a single deposition, a moment. She thought she could erase, hide, suppress has now come back to haunt her, and Justin Baldoni is the one holding the match after months of calculated restraint. Baldoni's legal team finally went public with the truth, submitting documents that directly contradict Lively's sworn statements, documents that the judge didn't even need to hear arguments about because the evidence spoke for itself. And when that ruling came down, when the court officially denied her motion to block parts of her own deposition, everything changed. Panic set in her legal team, scrambled allies went silent, and the questions began. What exactly did she say under oath? And why did she try so hard to hide it? The answers are starting to emerge. And they are explosive. Because this isn't just about a courtroom feud anymore. It's about credibility. It's about the collapse of a media illusion, and it's about the one mistake that may cost Blake Lively everything in this video. We're going deep. Inside the courtroom, strategies, the leaked contradictions, the exposed timelines, and the witnesses that could flip the entire case upside down, because what's happening right now isn't just a legal twist. It's a complete unraveling. And by the end of this story, the truth may finally be undeniable. Blake Lively is not okay, and the signs are impossible to ignore anymore. Her behavior has become increasingly erratic. Her tone in public filings has become alarmingly aggressive. And now her paranoia has fully exploded, following Justin Baldoni's shocking legal maneuver that may have finally exposed the lies she has been fighting to keep buried for months, the moment her lawyers realized the court was not going to protect her from answering difficult questions in her deposition. Something inside her seems to have snapped, according to sources close to the situation. Blake Lively was informed late last week that her motion to suppress sections of her deposition had been quietly denied by the judge without a hearing and without any room left for appeal. This decision came just days after Justin Baldoni's legal team submitted a blistering response to her suppression request, one that cited inconsistencies in her sworn statements compared to public interviews and private messages that had already been submitted into evidence behind closed doors. Baldoni's team had reportedly waited to file this strategic document until after her lawyers revealed their plan to bury parts of the testimony, and when they did it, was game over for Blake Lively, because what Baldoni filed wasn't just a legal argument. It was a full-scale expose of contradictions, misstatements, and misleading narratives that may now be used to impeach her credibility at trial. And this new reality has sent her spiraling into damage control mode, while she remains publicly silent. Her team has begun lashing out at reporters and even courtroom staffers in what insiders are calling a full-blown meltdown behind the scenes. It is clear that Baldoni's attorneys played a long game here. They had every chance to challenge her statements earlier, but they waited. They knew the court would give her enough rope to make her own case to frame herself as a victim to try to weaponize her deposition as a shield rather than a tool for transparency. And once she submitted the motion to block the very deposition she had initially demanded to give, the trap was set. Baldoni's lawyers responded not just with facts, but with receipts, timelines, message logs, and prior public interviews that directly contradicted her sworn testimony. And the court apparently agreed with them without even granting a hearing for Blake Lively to argue her side. This was an extraordinary move by the judge, and it suggests that the contradictions Baldoni exposed were not only substantial, but perhaps even undeniable now. With the motion officially denied, those sections of her deposition can and likely will be introduced at trial, or sooner, and that has reportedly caused panic among her inner circle, especially since multiple sources are suggesting that the content of those deposition answers directly conflicts with key claims she made both in public and in private communications. To allies, her team had carefully crafted a narrative, one in which she was a reluctant participant, dragged into a legal fight she never wanted by a vindictive former collaborator. But Baldoni's response paints a very different picture, one where Blake Lively allegedly coordinated with third parties to shape media narratives where she appears to have contradicted herself on key timelines, and where she may have even exaggerated the impact of events that formed the basis of her countersuit. What's worse for her is the way Baldoni structured his filing rather than accusing her directly of lying. He simply laid out the facts side by side. He placed her sworn answers next to earlier statements, interviews, and documented communications, and let the contradictions speak for themselves. This approach was surgical, cold, methodical, and devastating, and it seems to have worked because the judge didn't just deny her motion. He did it without even requiring a formal hearing. That kind of judicial confidence suggests that the contradictions were not minor or speculative. They were clear enough to warrant immediate rejection, and now those inconsistencies are on the record and headed straight for public exposure. And that is exactly what has sparked Blake Lively's reported panic. According to a well-placed source, her team is now scrambling to prepare a new motion to seal large portions of the upcoming trial record, a move that would essentially preempt the public from seeing or hearing the most damaging parts of her deposition. But legal analysts say that motion is unlikely to succeed, especially now that the court has already ruled against her once on the issue of transparency and considering the intense public interest. In this case, the judge may be hesitant to shield any evidence unless it's legally protected or clearly irrelevant, but none of that has stopped Blake Lively from reportedly trying every possible back channel to prevent the damage. According to court insiders, her attorneys have been reaching out to opposing counsel to discuss possible stipulations that could keep certain testimony from being read aloud in open court. But Baldoni's team has thus far refused to negotiate any new protective measures. Instead, they have quietly submitted a pre-trial witness list that suggests they plan to call not only Blake Lively, but also several individuals who were involved in early discussions about the public narrative and who may have been privy to communications that contradict her statements. This is an escalation, a tactical signal that Baldoni is no longer just defending himself. He is going on offense, and the timing could not be worse for Lively, who has already seen a significant drop in public support since her legal strategy began to unravel. Many former allies have gone quiet, refusing to comment on her behalf, and some have even started distancing themselves entirely. The once carefully coordinated support campaign around her seems to be falling apart, and there is now open speculation in Hollywood circles about whether more damaging revelations are coming, particularly around how certain media stories were sourced and who was feeding information to the press. Legal experts are also beginning to weigh in, noting that the judge's swift denial of her motion signals serious concern about the credibility of her deposition testimony, and that raises the possibility that the court could take additional steps if it finds that she knowingly misrepresented key facts under oath while no one is publicly using the word perjury. The potential consequences are clear. If her statements are found to be knowingly false, the court could allow additional impeachment, evidence, or even sanctions. And while such measures are rare in civil cases, the stakes of this particular trial are unusually high, not just in terms of reputation, but also in terms of money, with millions potentially on the line for damages and fees, and that financial risk may explain why her team is now exploring settlement options. According to one insider with knowledge of the discussions, there has been talk of proposing a quiet resolution before the full deposition becomes public. But Baldoni is reportedly uninterested in any settlement that doesn't include a full retraction and an apology, and that is something Blake Lively may be unwilling or unable to deliver, at least not without admitting to serious flaws in her case. So for now, the impasse continues and the tension grows. The legal walls are closing in, and her team seems to know it. Insiders say she has become increasingly withdrawn in recent days, skipping meetings, avoiding phone calls, and even canceling a scheduled appearance at a private industry event last weekend. Those close to her describe her mood as volatile, with one associate saying she is extremely angry at how the judge handled the motion, and even angrier at her own team for not anticipating this outcome. That anger has apparently spilled into the courtroom too, with at least one report of her lawyer making a heated remark to a clerk after receiving the judge's denial order. And while such outbursts are rarely documented officially, they speak volumes about the pressure her team is under as the trial date approaches and Baldoni's strategy becomes clearer. One that hinges not on drama or speculation, but on the cold, hard contrast between what she said and what the evidence shows. This approach is working so far, and it has already shifted the momentum of the case in a profound way, and the fallout for Blake Lively has only just begun. The reaction across Hollywood has been swift and divided, as more insiders quietly acknowledge that Blake Lively's legal position is far weaker than previously believed. Even those who once spoke confidently on her behalf are now treading carefully. Some have gone entirely silent, while others are reevaluating their alliances behind the scenes. According to one source who has worked closely with multiple high-profile publicity teams, there is now open discussion among several celebrity reps about whether to publicly distance their clients from the Lively situation, especially if the suppressed deposition sections reveal further damaging inconsistencies. What makes this moment even more precarious is how the deposition is being perceived. In legal circles, rather than being a simple misunderstanding or a minor contradiction, it is being described by attorneys following the case as a major credibility issue, and in a trial that hinges on who the jury believes, that could be catastrophic. For her narrative, her attorneys appear to have underestimated the level of preparation by Baldoni's team, who have so far executed a deliberate and highly effective strategy. While Blake's team focused on media optics, Baldoni focused on documentation, building a quiet timeline of every statement, every contradiction, every detail, and it paid off because the court is now operating from a factual record, not a celebrity image. And that reality is starting to take its toll on Blake Lively, who has always had an iron grip on her public persona. She is not accustomed to being outmaneuvered or exposed, especially not in a legal context, but Baldoni's methodical approach has done just that. Not by attacking her, but by confronting her version of events with her own prior words and the paper trail she left behind, according to courtroom observers. That paper trail includes emails, direct messages, and calendar entries that raise serious questions about her narrative, particularly around when she knew about certain developments and who she communicated with at critical moments, and all of it has been authenticated, submitted, and accepted by the court. That's why the judge didn't need a hearing to deny her motion. The evidence spoke for itself, and it painted a picture that could become the central theme of Baldoni's trial strategy. That Blake Lively's legal narrative is a carefully constructed story built on selective truths, and that when the full record is considered, the story falls apart. That kind of argument doesn't require emotional appeals, it requires facts, and Baldoni seems to have them, which is why his lawyers are not backing down. In fact, they have filed notice that they intend to submit additional deposition excerpts from third-party witnesses whose statements reportedly contradict Lively's version of key events, and some of those witnesses are expected to testify live at trial, which could make for a devastating series of public confrontations. If her team cannot successfully block or impeach their testimony, insiders close to Baldoni say he is fully prepared to go to trial, that he is confident in the strength of his evidence, and that he will not be deterred by threats of media backlash or private pressure to settle. And while his tone remains quiet in public, it's what his lawyers are doing behind the scenes that tells the real story. They are laying legal groundwork not just to win, but to win decisively, and to do it in a way that leaves no doubt about who was telling the truth and who was not. For Blake Lively, that possibility is terrifying, not just because of what it could mean for the case, but because of what it could do to her reputation. The Hollywood image she has spent years building of grace, control, and dignity is now under threat from a growing mountain of contradictions and inconsistencies, and her attempts to stop that threat by suppressing evidence have only made it worse, according to some insiders. The suppression motion may have been a last-ditch attempt to control the narrative before the trial begins, but its failure has only accelerated the damage, because now the focus is no longer on the substance of the case, it is on her credibility. And the media is beginning to shift as well. Where once headlines portrayed her as a victim of legal harassment, some are now starting to ask tougher questions about what exactly she said in that deposition, and why her lawyers were so desperate to hide it. And with Baldoni's team refusing to agree to any protective measures, the likelihood of those deposition sections becoming public soon is high. And that is something her team cannot stop. Not through spin, not through silence, and not through backroom deals, and that knowledge is reportedly driving a wedge between her and some longtime advisors. Several sources say there have been heated arguments behind closed doors as her legal and PR teams clash over strategy, with some urging transparency and others demanding further attempts to bury the record. The tension is palpable, and the confusion has led to several strategic missteps, including a failed attempt to float a sympathetic story in a major outlet, which was quietly killed after editors reviewed newly submitted court documents that cast doubt on the core narrative. It was a humiliating moment for her team, who have relied on media support in the past to shape public opinion. But the legal facts have now overtaken the optics, and her once tight control of the press is slipping. Her silence is no longer seen as strength. It is being interpreted as avoidance. And that shift in perception could be fatal to her legal defense, because in cases like this, perception becomes reality. Jurors will be watching and listening, not just to evidence, but to tone, to consistency, to the way each party responds under pressure. And right now, Blake Lively is not responding at all, and that vacuum is being filled by Baldoni's methodical case, building a case that now includes corroborating witnesses, time-stamped messages, and internal documents that undermine her core claims. And those documents are not going away. They are already in the record, already validated, and already shaping how the court sees the case. That's why this isn't just a legal fight anymore. It is a reputational collapse in slow motion. And her growing paranoia, according to sources, is only making things worse rather than regrouping. She is reportedly doubling down, pressuring her team to find new ways to block or delay evidence, and demanding answers for how the situation was allowed to spiral out of control. But the truth is, this spiral began the moment she chose to fight the case not on facts, but on perception, to present herself as a victim, while attempting to shield parts of her own testimony from scrutiny. And now that the court has said no, that decision is backfiring, and every attempt to fix it is digging the hole deeper. Her lawyers are scrambling, but they are out of legal tricks. The judge's denial was clear and decisive, and it leaves very little room for further delay tactics unless they can find a new legal basis to challenge the ruling, which insiders say is extremely unlikely. And with every day that passes, the risk grows that more deposition details will leak to the press, which would create a media firestorm that her team is unprepared to handle, especially if the leaked sections include the contradictions Baldoni has already outlined, and based on how quickly the judge ruled in his favor, those contradictions must have been substantial enough to warrant immediate denial. And that is devastating for her, because it suggests that even the court is beginning to see through the narrative her team has spent months trying to construct. And if that narrative collapses in open court, it could take her entire legal strategy with it. What began as a quiet courtroom dispute has now become a full-scale reckoning for Blake Lively, because once the deposition was denied, once the truth started slipping out, the walls began to close in faster than anyone expected. Her legal strategy, built on suppression and selective storytelling, has now been exposed for what it truly was: a last-ditch attempt to control a narrative that no longer belongs to her. And Justin Baldoni has made it clear through precision, through patience, and through undeniable documentation that he is no longer playing defense. He is taking control of the story, and he is letting the truth speak louder than the spin. And that truth is brutal, because it does not care about celebrity image, about curated press tours, or about the illusion of perfection. It only cares about the record. And right now, that record is not in her favor. The deposition she tried to hide, the inconsistencies she hoped no one would notice, the timeline she once controlled, are now tools being used to challenge the very foundation of her case, and the consequences are real. Her team is panicking, her allies are retreating, and the judge has already shown he is not interested in protecting image over facts. And in Hollywood, that is rare, because reputation usually wins until it doesn't. And this may be that moment. This may be the beginning of a reputational collapse in real time. And unless something changes, unless a new strategy emerges, that can undo the damage done. This case could define the next chapter of Blake Lively's public life, because this is no longer just a legal battle. This is a turning point, and the truth is no longer hiding in the shadows. It's standing center stage, waiting for the world to see.